Silvia Panetta 2018 Lecture Series. 2018, is the American Dream alive and well? This lecture discusses technology and the American Dream, impact of artificial intelligence, robotics, and cyber. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Silvia Panetta.
Good evening, everyone. What a pleasure to see all of you here. And to help us wind up our 21st season of the Leon Panetta Lecture Series. 21 years that we've been having these lectures, and it's a pleasure to see all of you here and to enjoy it with us. This this season, we have been discussing what we've called the American Dream throughout the season. We've touched on the economy, on foreign affairs, and the office of the presidency. So tonight, we turn our focus to technology, as it is in innovation and technology, which are two of the biggest drivers of progress. For hundreds of years, advances in technology have led to greater productivity, increased convenience and connectivity, and faster communication. In short, technology provides the opportunity for generations of Americans to live a better life, helping them achieve what we call the American Dream. However, with progress, as you know, comes some disruption. Some lost jobs, greater dependence on new technologies, new and powerful weapons, and the unknown consequences of innovation. Our society becomes more dependent on these devices and services every day. They are deeply integrated into the way we communicate, the way we conduct our commerce, our means of manufacturing, our system of voting, and on and more. As we become more connected, the related risks also grow. Companies, financial institutions, the federal and state governments are reliant on technology to perform daily functions, making every American household and our society as a whole vulnerable. Are Americans, and perhaps more importantly, our elected officials, giving enough attention to the consequences of our dependence on technology and the implications of artificial intelligence, robotics, and cyber? What is the long-term impact of automation on the labor force? How can we increase transparency in how our data and information is collected, stored, and used? Are companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon too big to fail? From self-driving cars to unmanned drones, who in the end is managing these machines? Are we making our lives easier at the risk of our safety, our privacy, and our democracy? Tonight, Leon will discuss these issues with two leading experts on national security, technology, and the intersection of the private and public sector. Our first guest is a retired 4-star Army general and the highest-ranked military official of the United States Cyber Command, the National Security Agency also, as well as the Central Security Service. He has played a pivotal role in securing the nation's safety at home and abroad for the past decade. The longest-serving director of the NSA, his work resulted in some of the most forward-thinking measures related to the production and management of intelligence for the United States government. In 2010, he was appointed by President Obama and confirmed by Congress as the first commander of United States Cyber Command. And as there, he established and defined how the nation is protected against cyber attacks. He was also a member of the 2016 Presidential Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity, where he developed key recommendations to create a defensible national cyber architecture by promoting rapid innovation and close public-private collaboration while preserving privacy and civil liberties. Additionally, he has met with President Trump to discuss the emerging cybersecurity executive order. He received a BS from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He also holds MS degrees in Business Administration Systems Technology, also known as electronic warfare, along with Physics and National Security Strategy. Please welcome General Keith Alexander. Welcome. Nice to have you here. Our second guest is the current chairman and CEO of Ampere Computing and the former president of Intel Corporation. She has broad knowledge of the computing industry that spans hardware, manufacturing, security, software, and services. She joined Intel in 1987, where she served as the chief of staff for former Intel CEO Andy Grove. She went on to hold a number of leadership positions at this firm. As executive vice president and general manager of the Software and Services Group, she was responsible for Intel's global software and services strategy, revenue, profit, and product research and development. She was named president of Intel in May 2013. During her 28-year career at Intel, she led the company's strategic expansion into providing proprietary and open source software and services for applications in enterprise, security, and cloud-based computing. She spearheaded an effort to bring more women into engineering and tech roles at the company. She's also chair of the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. In 2014, she was ranked 21st on Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business, and she was on that list. She was named number 37 on the Forbes 100 list. She received a BA in International Business and an MBA, both from the University of Oregon. Please welcome Renee James. Moderating our discussion is the man who created this lecture series more than 20 years ago, 21 to be exact. During his time as director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, he has seen firsthand what technology is capable of and the threat it represents. Please welcome Secretary Leon Panetta.
Good evening and welcome to everyone to this, which is the final forum this year of the Panetta Lecture Series. Our theme is the American Dream alive and well. And I think before we proceed any further, it would be appropriate to pause on this Memorial Day to remember all of those brave individuals who served this country in uniform, who fought and died in order to protect the American dream. I wish you would join me in thanking all of those who serve and those who have served our great country in making sure that we achieve that dream. We've talked about the impact of the economy. We've talked about the issue of national security and how it affects the American dream. And we talked about the presidency, the office of the presidency. Tonight, we focus on technology and the impact that technology can have on the ability of particularly young people to be able to achieve that better life. Throughout our history, we have seen innovation. We've had the steam engine, we've had the automobile, the airplane, we've had the splitting of the atom. And with those innovations and so many others came both progress and disruption. At the turn of the 20th century, 41% of our population worked in agriculture in this country. Today, less than 2%. And yet, we feed not only this country, but we help feed the world. GM in the 1970s had 600,000 workers that produced their automobiles. Today, it's less than a third of that number. And yet they produce more cars and trucks than ever. What will history say about the era that we're in now, the era of the computer and the microchip? Will we have progress, or will we have a tremendous number of lost jobs? Will we be able to have greater access to information, or will it be at the cost of our privacy? Will we have a better life, or will we be developing things that could very well threaten our lives in the future? Those are the questions that I will ask our very distinguished speakers tonight. So I welcome you and thank you both for being here. Let me begin with kind of a broad question on the whole issue of technology. Since the last time we talked, an awful lot has happened. Hundreds of thousands of personal files have been hacked and stolen. The Russians obviously conducted a bold cyber attack on our election system. Cambridge Analytica used Facebook information in order to influence elections. Mark Zuckerberg testified before the Congress, European Union. And now the European Union has taken steps to protect private information. We've had the effort to develop driverless cars, artificial intelligence, robotics. A lot going on, and with it a lot of uncertainty, certainly about the consequences. So my first question is, can we be able to control these consequences that can hurt us in the future? Or will we continue to have a competitive free-for-all without regard to the consequences? Renee?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, you know, it's like all of those kind of broad questions. So, will we continue to have a competitive free-for-all? One of the things that has contributed to U.S. leadership over, a long period of time has been the free market nature of technology innovation. So I do think, and we do have regulations around what can and can't be exported, what you can and can't do with certain kinds of technologies, and I think that's appropriate. But I think we have to be careful to not, stop that engine of innovation. It's very important to continue to innovate, and then I think it's more important looking forward than it's been in the past, because we now have other nation states that have, a more unlimited amount of funding directly into their companies racing with us. And so I think the competitive free-for-all nature of technology and innovation is good. The managing the consequences is a frontier that, we need to start dealing with. Frankly, when technology was being used as a means to help us, do everyday tasks. That's really how we thought about computers when we first, started working on PCs in the late 80s, early 90s was, we're just going to help people do things better. That's really different than how technology is used today. So I do think that we have a little bit more room to start thinking about, appropriate use, how much use, privacy matters. A lot of things have changed with social networks and the, broadness of the internet and the interconnectedness, not just of people inside the United States, but to people around the world. So I think that combination of globalism and pervasive use of technology really forces us to say, okay, are there boundaries? Are there things that we need to actually start thinking about that we didn't think about before? But I don't think we want to curtail the innovation.
Keith?
I'm glad that you let Renee go first. So thanks. The ladies first.
That just gave her more time to think of something.
Yeah, that's right. So, there's two things that come to my mind on that question. First, and perhaps foremost, we have our basic set of values that we as a nation live by. And that should not change with technology. These are the things that make America great. And I believe those are the principles that we want to continue to push, our values. Now, having said that, the thing that's lacking and the thing that's very difficult with this rapid change of technology is ensuring our vision stays true. Where are we going and where is this going to take us? And I believe that the hardest part of all of this is having a vision, both for the public sector especially, and the private sector. Where are we going? Where does this technology take us? And how are we going to govern in this area? I think that is lacking. And part of it is it's going so fast that those in Congress can't keep up with it. So our laws lag, and that impacts civil liberties and privacy to a part. And those that do make the laws, like the European laws, don't understand the full impact of the technology they're now putting laws on. And the consequence of that is even worse. And so you don't want to create a huge bureaucracy to try to protect something that you've already lost. So I think it requires us to step back, lay out the vision. Where is this going to take us, and what does our country need in this? And there are some tremendous opportunities here. I think we could lay out, for example, with respect to our intellectual property. One of the greatest things that we have as a country is we're an innovation nation. And if you think about that, what brought us from World War II to where we are today was that greatest generation came out of World War II and said, here's how we're going to make America. And they had a vision for it. And that generation and where they took us is what we now need to do with this technology. But we're letting it go. People are stealing it, the Chinese especially. It's the greatest theft and transfer of wealth in history, and it impacts our future. So one of those fundamental portions of our strategy should be protect that for future generations. Fix that. And that requires us to say, okay, if that's one of the important things, we want to protect. I have 16 grandchildren. I know I don't look that old. Thank you very much. My wife is much younger. She's here in the audience. But when you think about those kids that we have out there, we want them to have a better life. This is one of your questions. How do we get them a better life if somebody takes all our wealth? And so let's lay it out and let's come up with that strategy, that vision for the future. I think that's the most important thing we can do. And this is where the private sector can help the government. We get great people like Renee and others in industry. You're welcome. And we work together on a couple of things.
We did.
And so when you think about that, if you bring that together and help educate the lawmakers on where we need to go, let's put this country together and get it in that path. That's what I think.
Let's try to, if you can, let's see if we can better understand the threat from technology. I think we all remember the movie 2001, where Hal the computer took over the operation of the spaceship. Today, some are comparing artificial intelligence to the development of nuclear power, and they talk about Robert Oppenheimer's warning that in seeking these new technologies, it can eclipse the consideration of the consequences. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, said artificial intelligence is potentially more dangerous than nukes. What's he talking about? What are the dangers associated with artificial intelligence?
Okay,
You go first.
Yes, ma'am. So here's the concern is machines will take over. Think of it, this is the Terminator outcome. And there's a great debate that goes on between Elon Musk and Bill Gates on where this ends up. I'm actually more towards where Gates is, and that is, I think, well, it's coming. Artificial intelligence is coming. We are not going to stop it. So then the question is, how do we make this work for the better of mankind? There's a couple things that I'd put on the table: artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Those two things combined, the country that leads that will be the next superpower. That needs to be us. We need to lead it. And the second reason that I think we need to lead it, it was a privilege and honor serving with you and others. No matter what you hear about in the papers and all that, the people, especially in the military and in the intelligence community, are here for one thing: to defend our nation. And, these are good people. They're not in it to take over some other country and take all their oil or something. They're in it for the right reason. And I believe our country, with that technology, will help the rest of the world. We need to be the leader in this area. If we're not, then whoever beats us to it will be the leader. And right now, we lack a program, a coherent program, like a Manhattan Project for artificial intelligence and for quantum computing. And so we ought to put that up. We ought to get that going. A huge public-private partnership, but it's the future of our nation, because that technology will, and the way we evolve that technology, will actually help evolve the future of mankind. And I believe our people, those folks up the road here and across our nation, have the right heart in mind for that technology. And so,
Renee, define for the audience when we talk about artificial intelligence, exactly, what are we talking about? What is it about?
That's a great question. I was going to go back on this as well. Artificial intelligence is really a collection of different technologies and methods that all fall into the category of cognitive systems. Cognitive platforms is the way that people, cognitive software can be. So probably almost everyone in this audience uses artificial intelligence every day, but don't think about it, right? So it's in your spam filters, it's in your Google search if you used Waze or Google Maps to get here, or if you, used your Alexa and asked, or Echo and asked questions. All of those fall into different pieces of what is considered artificial intelligence. It could be natural language processing, it could be machine learning, and it could go all the way and to a more extreme area of deep thinking. But what I would say is the thing that has always been true in the technology business is that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So any retrospective looking, either legislation or thinking about how we should stop something never has worked in the tech business, because someone else will just do it. And in our case, when we talk about artificial intelligence and then beyond that, quantum computing, which is a whole another very exciting frontier that I'll let the general talk about as well, it's now a race. And so you can't put it back in the bottle, so you have to win. That's kind of where we're at, and I think we both agree on that. Are there downsides? Sure, there's downsides, because bad people can use it too. But that's true of every technology. I mean, I could have made the same argument when we invented computers. I mean, when we first had the first PCs out, we could say, oh my gosh, these things are dangerous. Turns out you can, you figure out how to do all these things you can never do. Well, that's true. But the other side of it is you can sequence human DNA, and you can now get, personalized cancer treatment. You can know things about when hurricanes are coming that you couldn't know before. All of that has been done in the last 40 years, 30, 40 years. I mean, and pervasively only in the last 30. So, every frontier of technology, we always say the same thing. When we first invented video, for example, and the first videos came up, I'll never forget, we were all so excited. Oh my gosh, 5 frames per minute. This 5 frames per second. This is horrible. Who's ever going to use this? Now we have YouTube. I always tell my kids, you watch it because, we worked on that so you could do this YouTube thing. And you can't imagine what the future holds when you invent these things. So yeah, there's a downside. The downside is other people could get there first, very dangerous for the health and longevity of our point of view of values. And the second thing is bad people will use it too. So we have to have a plan for what to do, I think, on that side.
Let's talk about this issue of privacy that has kind of been debated over these last number of months. Facebook obviously was selling personal information, and that raised a lot of questions about protecting privacy. But the very nature of companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, I mean, it is about going and finding out about the habits and dislikes of people and gathering that information. That's part of what the business is about. Now, Europe has come forward with this new law to try to deal with this concern. General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which I think went into effect this last Friday. And companies are obviously struggling to comply, trying to figure out what it's about. Will the United States follow suit with what Europe did and implement the same kind of approach with regards to privacy? Can privacy be protected, or is in many ways that genie out of the box just by the nature of the kind of technology we're dealing with? What do you think? Well,
the General Data Protection Regulation, which is a European regulation, but if you operate globally as a company and you store or manage people's data, which many services and everybody in the cloud does, you must comply. The fines are very, very steep. They're, a significant percentage of your revenue globally. And so everyone's scrambling to comply with a regulation that I think, and I'll let General Alexander comment on this, is a little bit retrospective, because one of the things we talk about when we talk about protecting people is you talk about privacy and security, but they're linked. And you cannot solve privacy without security. And I think that this particular regulatory regime is very focused on privacy that was already out there, and it's very hard to manage that. People's data that they already allowed to be stored in companies' clouds. So I hope the United States does not follow suit. I'm not sure that it's exactly the right approach. I think we can do things that are more holistic, but privacy is an important topic that needs to be revitalized in the national dialogue. There's two pieces to it. Part of it is, what is the right environment and regulatory viewpoint on it, but the other part is personal responsibility. You're going to use the internet, it's like driving a car at your own risk. You got to learn how to drive, you got to get a license. You're going to go on the internet, you need to understand what's going on in these sites. And I do think that, like we at one point educated everyone, with Smokey the Bear and Surgeon General warnings and that kind of thing. Privacy is the kind of thing that could really, I think, benefit from national warning for people to just go and look at the sites they're going to and what are their privacy settings. With this GDPR law regulation that came into effect last week, one of the positive parts of it is it's forced every site to warn everybody about what their new privacy policy is. And if you click through, they explain it to you. If you say yes to this, we can now use your data to do X, Y, Z. I think on the point about data, the business of these internet companies is not to sell your data. It's to aggregate data, because data and the weaponization of data on the negative side, on the cyber side, data is, as someone has said, the new oil, right? So the aggregation of data and the ability to analyze it and know things about it, the insights from AI, is really the second act of the business. The first act is, hey, we should share our photos with everyone. The second act is, hey, we know what everybody does, right? And I think that's the part where we need to just bring the general education level up for our citizens, so they understand what is going on with their information.
Keith, so I'll start out on the GDPR. I have a couple concerns about that. First, it's a huge bureaucracy. And so what you're doing is all of a sudden you're saying, here's all the things that you have to do to operate and bring technology into Europe. And it leaves me feeling as if it's a trade barrier for our companies that do things that they can't do. So I'm concerned about that. I think it needs to be done for the right reasons, creating all this paperwork. Now, my company has to do it, your company has to do it. When you look at that, you think, this is a ton of paperwork.
And it's very expensive, actually.
Yeah, and you look at it and you say, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the first part. With respect to the civil liberties, privacy, and security, I think you can do both. And I think we must do both. I think this is where we have to bring this all and put it on the table and explain it so the American people understand what they're doing with data, what they can and what they cannot do. And then we should set it up in a way that makes it easy to implement, not so hard that you need another 30 lawyers. I love lawyers. That's right. Both of them in the audience. So you think, you've gone through all that. You think, and then they interpret it, and you get two different interpretations. It's left or it's right. It's right or it's wrong. And so I think that part is just absolutely broke. I do think, having been at the National Security Agency, our country does this a lot better than we ever give ourselves credit for. And you know this from what we did together. Imagine that for the government to collect any information, they have to go through on U.S. people, has to go through courts, Congress, and the administration, and be overseen by all. I had 11 federal judges supervising me. Now, I was in a lot of trouble when I was younger. That made me nervous. But they didn't bring that up, Leo. I was good, so don't worry, it was good. But when you think about this, we need some of that data to protect this country. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. So how do you get the right data? And that's where the judges look at the Fourth Amendment and what we need. So you can do both, and we've proven that we can do both. I don't think we do good explaining both. And I think that's where it needs to go. Private companies. And here's one I just give you all to think about. Imagine that if everybody's human genome in this room here, if we could put it together and we said, if you would all share your human genome and your DNA sequencing, we can solve these forms of cancer. But you have to agree to do that. But imagine that somebody's children or grandchildren would live because we shared it. Should we share it? And what do you lose by not sharing it? How many here can state their whole human genome? I can't. It's like 30,000 per times 20 some, right? That's a lot. So even if you share it, the chances somebody would be able to memorize it is so. But those things enter into this question. And I think at times a small minority says, well, of course you can't share that because that's personal to you, Alexander. Oh, Abdicil. But it's not. And when you think about it, oftentimes we're fighting over the wrong thing. What we really mean by privacy, in my mind, is if I communicate with my wife on email, and that's a private communication, it should remain private. And we ought to protect that. And we ought to have those types of things. If Google says that we'll let you use this site, but oh, by the way, we're going to track what you do to actually make this better for you. And you can opt in, read this, click here.
That's right.
And then you order something online, right, Ted? The next thing you know, you get 6 ads. You think, whoa, I didn't want those ads, but they're trying to help you about what you're doing. I'm getting more ads for cars now than ever before. It's because I looked up a car. So those kind of things, okay, so that's part of what they're doing. That's how they make Google work. I don't think that's bad. And I'll just say on Zuckerberg, because we were talking earlier about this. I was testifying in Congress in the room next to him when he was testifying, and I thought, wow, I bet you he knows what it's like now, my old job. I bet you he's loving life right now. He's getting all that attention. And they're just like, wire brushing him. It's like they call it beating a baby seal, and he's in there. That's what it's like in Congress. So anyhow, of course, that never happened when you were there. So I'm just saying, you were the good guy. When you think about some of the things that we do on this, it's crazy. So
let me ask you something. Just speaking of that, Zuckerberg's testimony brought this to mind. Excluding the local congressman.
He was in my room. He was in my room, actually.
That's right. He was in your room.
He was in my room. He did good.
My impression is most legislators don't really understand the technology we're talking about. Is that your sense?
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you. So the good part, they don't. So this is the hard part. So
that's the good part.
They don't understand. But the good part is they came up afterwards and said, look, we got to create legislation. Will you help us? I mean, and they said, look, you guys understand this. Help us get this right. And I thought, and several of the members of Congress came up and said, look, we admit we don't understand it. We weren't computer science majors. We're not mathematicians. That just stunned me. I thought everybody was a mathematician in Congress. But so it adds up now. Math joke. So I do think we never got people at NSA to laugh over those either. But I think the good part is they ask for help. The hard part is when they don't ask for help and they want to legislate something. And that's what I think Germany and the EU is doing with the GDPR.
Yeah. Have you had, in your context in Washington, you've dealt with members. What's your impression?
I think, I generally agree, although I probably don't have any experience testifying in front of any of them.
We can get you there.
Yeah, thanks. He's a giver. I would say that there are a lot of staffers who understand a lot, that are very savvy. And so I feel like there's been a shift, and at least in my experience in the last, 9 years, I'm dealing with people now that actually do understand the technology, the staffers. And I can't say that their bosses know it, but I can say that at least they're starting to be people to talk to that, they're, pretty savvy and
What's your bet? Do you think Congress is going to do anything legislatively on this privacy issue? Yes or no? What do you think?
Not on the privacy. I think it'll be more on the cybersecurity.
That's what I agree.
Yeah.
I think it'll be on cyber.
It's got to be how we defend the country.
Yeah.
And there are some steps that Congress has to take, and the Armed Services Committee understands that. And so I thought that was a good idea.
Let me turn to this issue about jobs and the American dream. Obviously, as I said, we know that innovation can cost jobs. We've been through the Industrial Revolution. We've been through the development of all of these new innovations. I think the estimate now in manufacturing is that 88% of the jobs lost in manufacturing were lost because of robotics. And in addition to that, I think there's reports that about 47% of U.S. employment is at high risk in terms of the impact that it may take away their jobs. As we know, on driverless cars, I think the estimate is something like 5 million Americans could lose their jobs as a result of developing that technology. in the past, when we've gone through this, jobs somehow were replaced, new jobs were created. I guess the question is, will that happen again? Or is this technology moving so fast and costing so many jobs that we may be in an unprecedented time in terms of its impact on jobs? What do you think?
There's four key things, if I could put on the table, that I think are interesting pieces of information. First, the amount of unique information that will be created this year is more than the last 5,000 years combined. Technology is doubling every 2 years. The top 10 in-demand jobs today didn't exist 11 years ago. Those are app providers for the iPhone, Samsung, cloud providers. You think none of that existed. And it was interesting, one other one is you can buy today an Apple Airport time capsule, 3 terabyte, for $399. That's a lot of data. And we have the capability to transmit that data in a few seconds with new communications, optical communications devices. A few seconds. In 1998, we had 56.6K modems. If you used a 56.6K modem to transmit that same amount of data, it would take you 13.6 years. So we live in exponential times. It's changing that rapidly, and we already are replacing the jobs. The top 10 in-demand jobs didn't exist, and they are now there. These are the ones the younger generation is going to. And so I think it will replace it. It offers us some great opportunities. Renee brought out about healthcare.
Yeah.
You know, the advances in healthcare are going to be significant over the next 2 decades. This is going to be the time, and many of us here want this, fix these things before it comes to us. Cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. I can't remember the last one. So when you think about that, we've got to get out in front of these.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be, I do think there'll be new jobs created. I think there'll be different kinds of jobs. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned this before, that we are already seeing in places where we're using a lot of chatbot technology. When you talk to a customer service agent, do you know if it's a machine or if it's a person? Have you thought about it? Sometimes you know, sometimes you don't. Some of these are so good that we now know, because we test, that people don't know that they're talking to the machine, and actually 43% of the time they like talking to the machine more than talking to real people. So what we're finding, though, is there's an emerging class of services. Even in healthcare, we did a project with Oregon Health Sciences where there needs to be new roles created as all of these new technologies, deep learning and analytic data, new jobs created to actually be services, almost human services that interact with the machine and with people. And so there's these new categories of jobs, not just app developers for the iPhone, which is a big one, but we see these emerging things that didn't exist before in the hospital, where it's a technical job and it's a human's job, and the doctors don't know how to do these things. So new categories of jobs will emerge. They always do. I do think that there is going to be, some work that needs to happen that has not happened on what kind of educational programs are we going to need to be able to feed those kinds of new opportunities. There'll be displacement. It's going to happen. We know that. It happens in every technology shift, and we're heading towards a new shift. I mean, I definitely think AI and whatever comes beyond artificial intelligence, quantum, other kinds of computing is a shift. It's a shift the magnitude of when we had the first computers, when we had the internet, now we have this. And those big shifts are when we see the change.
If you look at the jobs we're talking about, I mean, just look on driverless cars. It's going to take jobs from truck drivers, cabbies, bus drivers. We'll probably, robots will start replacing grocery clerks, et cetera, retail individuals. Is it not going to increase the gap between the skilled and the unskilled? In other words, the gap that we have today, which is increasing, is it going to make that gap even worse? And can education and other steps try to prevent that from happening?
So I do think the gap will grow between just because of the spread of technologies, to those that are most informed on technology, to those that are less informed, those that have the most basic, driving or whatever. Yes, I think that gap will grow. Now, it's interesting because, I go back to that Greatest Generation, and you think about, and we had talked about this a few years ago, and you think about what our parents' whole objective in their life is for our life. They said, what we want to do is to make sure that you have a better life than we did. And so they were pushing that out. Now it's our turn to make that for our children. And I think we can do it. And those that are here in the less part are going to be looking and say, for my children, I want them to be up here. And I want them to be up here. And that's what all of the families will do. I mean, that's what we do. And you want to make it better for your children and your grandchildren, so that they'll take care of us in our older age. That's what that part hasn't happened
yet. We'll have a robot for
that. Maybe we can get a better robot. The robot might be nicer to us. You're right.
Yeah, right. But they don't have to take a vacation.
That's right. You don't have to be nice to them. But I do think, the spread will continue to grow. But I also think that there's this concept called uplifting that we briefly talked about. Uplifting is where every time you learn something, and you can see this throughout history, mankind takes another step, whether it's the printing press or the railroad or the highway system or computers, television. Every time we do that, mankind takes a step up. There are still some people down here at the basic level, so you're going to have that bigger spread. But I think by and large, that is a good thing.
Will education solve the problem?
I don't think it'll solve the problem. It never has, but I think it's a part of the solution. I do, actually, there's kind of a theory, a school of thought that some of this technology will actually help close the gap because, it is assistive in many ways, right? To help people come along that spectrum of learning about technology, of being, capable. So I do think, though, we have to do something. We can't just say, oh, gosh, it's going to be a displacement. This is a change in how we work, how we think, how we do, right? We all seem to make it through the smartphone thing. Even my mother texts me all the time about things. She's probably watching us right now, and she's going to text me, why did you tell them that? So, I think we can make it through this. I do. People have figured out how to use all of these different technologies, and they don't even know they're using AI, but 80% of the United States is using it every day. I do think that we will find ways through, but I think we have to start adjusting the curriculum. It's not good enough to say we got to have laptops in schools. That's not going to cut it. We're going to have to do more. So.
Okay, we've reached the halfway point in the program, and it's a point where I take a moment to recognize our question review team, the people who are responsible for selecting the questions that will be presented to the speakers. And if I could ask you to hold your applause while I introduce them. They are, again, Fran Gaver, who is our veteran question review team member, David Kellogg, the managing editor of the Monterey Herald, Doug McKnight, a reporter for the KAZU Radio, and Paul Miller, who is the owner and publisher of the Carmel Pinecone. Would you thank them, please? And because it is the Memorial Day weekend, we do not have our normal student program, but I wanted to mention the fact that this season reflected some of the strongest student attendance that we've had in the more than 20-year history of the lecture series. This year, we had more than 1,000 students joining us. The student program, thank you. That student program is really due to the generosity of our sponsors, and Silvia and I, along with the Panetta Institute Board of Directors, are very grateful for that sponsorship because it allows students from the high schools, the colleges, universities, the military installations throughout the Central Coast to be able to participate. So I would ask you to please give those sponsors a hand. Thank you. All right, Keith, this is down your line. With conventional military weaponry,
Oh, no, I'll answer that.
is it clear what constitutes an act of war? I assume when it comes to the use of a cyber attack. When it comes to, here it is, when it comes to cyber attacks and intrusive actions, let me just interpret myself. What constitutes a cyber act of war?
So this has been a debate, as you know, with both administrations when we were there, both the Bush and the Obama administration. And neither wanted to put a line in the sand because that meant somebody would have to do something. But here's my interpretation of what I gave as an act of war. When a foreign nation uses cyber and their intent is to do something destructive, and they do, whether it's take down Sony or the power grid, that would have equal physical aspects to it, then I believe that's an act of war. Now, it doesn't mean we go to war. It means that's an act of war, and the government, the president and the secretary, now have the option of how do you respond. And there's a whole range of options that they have, from military all the way back to cyber, overt or covert. But I think when countries attack us in cyber, whether they attack the government or the commercial sector, and they destroy data, if it were physical, it would be an act of war. And in cyber, I think it should be the same thing. Now, I would just highlight that we need to fix our defense first. Our defense is terrible. It's inadequate. We have no way of pairing government and industry together, and so the government can't see it. So you walk down that road, and what you find out is, well, it's an act of war, but you can't see that it's an act of war, so you can't respond, so you're doing incident response. Incident response means you lose everything, and then the government comes in and tells you you lost everything. You don't need that. When I talk to CEOs, they say, we'd prefer not to get hacked. Okay. That's pretty good. So if you're going to do that, you're starting to set up this, think of it as an integrated air defense system for cyber. And if you do that, now when a nation state tries to shut down our energy sector, you can see it. We've got to get to that level. We've got to have a vision for cyber that does that. And then when other countries start to probe it, we can send them a warning. Do you really want to do this? I like the happy face on the computer of the president of that country before you destroy his computer. And you say, you know, don't mess with us. Oh, that's Texas, but you know, you get it.
Any thoughts about what constitutes an act of war?
Well, he and I agree, because we had the same conversation. Well, I've only dealt with the Obama administration about the same things, in fact, the Sony thing specifically. But what I would say is, from the other side of it, it's very difficult, because when the incident is occurring, you really don't, you can't know who's perpetrating it. You know, you can go and you ask people that you might know, friends, and they might be able to assist you. But as General said, it's after the fact. And because we don't have a data sharing regime that the two of us have tried very, hard to get into place, and hopefully some new legislation might do that, you really don't have a unified response mechanism in the United States today. So as a company, it's after the fact, you figure out who did it, there's nothing you can really do but restore yourself to last known good. So what we have been advocating, and I feel very strongly that we have just missed on, is this ability to share information about threats and incoming threats, even blinded. You don't have to know, from what company. You can opt in a blind way into this information sharing and be able to do some preventative, and share information. And I think that's important for us.
Keith, if our intelligence agencies told us that, for example, Russia was going to conduct a cyber attack on our electric grid, or that Iran was going to conduct a cyber attack on our electric grid, do we have the capability to go after them and stop them from doing that?
Yes.
We're treading close to classified information.
Yeah, so I think the hard part, yes, I think we could stop them. It was a great opportunity serving at NSA and Cyber Command in our military. We have great people, and I think we're the best in the world. The real problem that our government has is the government can't see all that hitting our private sector.
That's exactly
because we don't have the information sharing, and that's what Renee was saying. So if you put that together, you'd say, look, there are things critical to the operation continuity of government for this nation. Energy, finance, healthcare, telecommunications, some other parts of government. Some of them we could let them shut down. We'll pick those later. But if you think about it and you say everybody agrees to that, then the next thing you'd say is, so how do you see that data that's hitting them? And the answer is, well, we don't share, or we share it by, emails go at the speed of light. We want to share data today by writing it out, having somebody look at it, sending it to a lawyer, seeing if it's okay, and then sending it down. Think if we did our missile defense program like that, right? Everybody'd say, that's crazy. But that's how we do cyber. Sharing, and that's just in the private sector.
Yeah.
And so we have to fix that. And I believe we're in part doing that, and that's one of the things Congress is looking at. But you got to take the next step, and then we need to do it.
Let me ask you along those lines. How vulnerable is the United States to a cyber Pearl Harbor? In other words, a cyber attack that could literally paralyze our country. And what kind of virus are we talking about? How would it be deployed? And what would be the targets?
So I think we and other countries are vulnerable. I think we have more to lose than anybody else. Not just our intellectual property, but our whole nation is, connected to the networks. And I was in the Ukraine last week, and while I was there, I didn't do this. I'm just reporting what I heard. So let's get this part. But Russian intelligence had infected 500,000 routers worldwide. Most of them in the Ukraine. With that capability, not only could they steal credentials and other things, but they could shut down communications within that country. Shut it down. We could suffer the same kinds of attacks. And my experience, CEOs, especially in energy and finance, are really pushing to get this fixed. They really are. But we're at risk. And the biggest risk we have is not that they're not trying to do their part, it's that they can't talk to government and there's nobody to shoot back. And so think about somebody launching missiles at you and they're saying they're shooting over there, and then you just say, well, where's our shooters? They don't have rules of engagement and they can't see the fire. So they can't shoot back. And it would only be by luck or by going back over time to do that. And as we noted earlier, that's crazy because that means everybody's lost and now we enter in. So I do think we're at risk today because we haven't put all that in place. And we need to go fix that.
Renee, when you look at, obviously there are a lot more attacks to the private sector going on.
Right.
But in addition to that, when you look at our infrastructure, the government doesn't really control the infrastructure. No. These are companies that are out there that that are controlling it. How do we make sure that those companies can effectively defend against the kind of sophisticated cyber attacks we're talking about?
Well, this is actually all part of the same conversation. Today, those companies do an excellent job. They all, work very hard. Every major, company in every sector is really deploying as much as they can to defend. Everyone's getting, and I should say, I know we're focused on critical infrastructure and, what could you take down? But the reality is one of the biggest things that's going on is really economic warfare through cyber, which is break in and steal intellectual property and actually trade secret, the know-how, which is one of the most elusive things that some of our competitive nation states have not been able to get. They can actually get the technology, but they can't figure out the know-how, which is the how to employ it, how to use it, how to make it work. And that is, so these cyber attacks aren't just let's disrupt the United States power grid, which is an issue in itself. It's actually get into these companies and figure out how to exfiltrate information, intellectual property, and trade secret. So the infrastructure companies do a great job, but it's all part of the same issue. In fact, the infrastructure companies are part of the committee that I'm the chair of, where we, have been having this dialogue. We used to have it with the general. We have it with his next person who's running that department. You have to be able to share information, and we aren't in a place legislatively and or physically, the right configuration to do that. So they're on their own. They're very good at it. But after the fact, there's a big discussion. Oh, this happened. Did you see that? So what's happened is ad hoc. Many of us, and when I was at Intel, and now even in my current role at my new company, we have an informal network where all the CISOs call each other. And or some of the CEOs call each other. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? And I heard this from so-and-so. This is the greatest way that people get information and, prepare themselves. We got hit with this. You guys better get ready. It's not perfect, but it's what we're doing right now.
So there's a real problem with the private sector sharing the information. I mean, the
liability part.
I mean, well, what you're saying is that we really need a public-private partnership to effectively defend this country.
That's right.
From those kinds of attacks. But the problem is that there isn't that sharing of information.
It's worse.
There's laws that
it's
make
not,
it very difficult.
Yeah, it's not that, not just that they can't share, it's the mechanisms that we think about sharing today are ineffective for accomplishing the job that you want to do. We want, right now, it was interesting when I got Cyber Command, we got Cyber Command given to me because we stopped an attack on the Defense Department, a big one. NSA did. And the issue when I went and talked to, after we got this job, I said, well, what happened? And everybody started talking, and it sounded like Johnny Depp. What? Nobody understood. And the reason, and the reason is, we fight blind in cyberspace. You can't see it. Ask somebody to explain to you how the attack went. And when you listen to it, what you find out is they don't have a clue. They know, well, I got this piece, and then somebody comes in and said, this piece of malware got in here and got it. And, and think about fighting a military campaign where everybody's blindfolded and you have no sensors and people are shooting at you and you say, what's going on? And more importantly, you're not networked together, you're all fighting by yourselves. Because that's how we fight today.
With the people
so think about this. Every energy company out there fights and defends itself.
That's right.
Every finance company, but they share data, but the amount and time they share it, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
This is going at network speed. Imagine now, if you will, a network that oversees all of that shares only the malware, not personally identifiable information. Here's what's trying to probe you. Here's what's going on. That's visible to those companies and to the government. That's where we need to be. And in that manner, you can then see, Iran is trying to hit our finance sector. Well, they did that, right? And we couldn't see it. And so the decision makers did not understand the impact of those attacks, because they couldn't see it. And they said, well, you're being attacked, you should fix that yourself. It's a good thing it wasn't a motorized rifle regiment.
Yeah, no, exactly. Talking about attacks, this next question deals with the 2016 attack on our election. What actions have the federal government and states taken to prevent a repeat during the midterm elections? We know We know, obviously, that what the Russians did in 2016. The intelligence agencies tell us that the Russians are continuing to do that. Do we have an effective mechanism at the federal and state level to try to prevent that from happening?
Absolutely not.
I can't see it.
And the reason, there's several aspects of this, and it was interesting. I was in the Ukraine last week, as I mentioned earlier, and this was one of the big issues. And you look at there, Russia is using what's called hybrid warfare in their terms to do information campaigns and cyber attacks and all of these things to impact the outcome of the election more favorable to Russia. And, it's interesting, from creating a false story, which they did here. They created a white group and a black group, created on Facebook. These were both created by Russians in St. Petersburg. And then in the U.S., over 10,000 people joined each of these groups, and then they tried to get them to fight each other. And they got it going, and and they were all the people in these groups said, no, this is a real group, we're doing this, and it was all set up in cyber. And we don't see that. So when you think about that, it's inadequate. That's the first part. Influencing the outcome of a campaign is what they're trying to do. And I think one of the ways that we ought to get out in front of this, the Ukrainian presidential elections will come in March of next year. We ought to be all over that, seeing what Russia is doing and making sure we're in front of that and do the best we can, because ours will follow. And we've got to get this right, and it's not where it needs to be. And I think Renee and I would agree on this point, is that, it's completely inadequate. And the Russians, if you leave this out there for them to go after, or any of our adversaries, they're going to go after it. It's in their national interest. And so if you don't like it, fix the defense.
Well, I think one of the complexities in this situation is part of the defense is social networks. And, on the cyber side, we might be able to do a better job of tightening up the defense. But on the social networking and the social engineering side, I think it's quite difficult. And we have to, rely on, this is back to one of our challenges that's different than the people that we have as adversaries, is we have a, open, democratic, free market system, which doesn't allow, currently we don't have this concept of a ring of defense that's somehow nationalized, even though they're supposedly independent companies, right? So it's very difficult to say, okay, now everybody, you better seek out and find anything that might look suspicious, that's, maybe social engineering the outcome, because now we're saying to the Facebooks and the Googles and the, can you go do that piece of work for us, right? Because, the government doesn't have the ability to manage social networks. That's not part of how we operate here in the United States.
So what you're saying is that you basically place false stories.
Yeah, the social engineering aspect is huge.
And put that into the social media world, and that stuff then spreads by itself.
I think that the way that we are so connected by social networks, and I don't mean just Facebook, I mean, WeChat and WhatsApp and, all of this, is that I think we have to this is one of the things I think we have to start educating people on. Remember when people used to say to you, not everything you read is true, not everything they put in the paper is true. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. Like, nobody seems to be able to tell what's true and what's not true. This is a very big deal, because at the basis of that is all of these different social engineering techniques, which is, the most obvious example of it has been the Russian interference in the election, but there's lots of others that we just haven't had in the dialogue yet. So I do think that there's a piece of work that we need to do to figure out how we're going to deal with this issue in social networks and, for lack of a better term, fake news.
It's interesting. One of the things that came out is France, having seen what happened in our election, said, what we'll do is, we know we're going to get hacked by Russia, and we know when they hack our stuff, they'll throw it out into the network. So what we'll do is put some crazy stuff into our data that we know is absolutely stupid. So when they pour it out there, we'll say, look, that's crazy. You know that can't be right, and this is this. And they did that, and they actually were able to do that. So I think we've got to come up with a way, and it's interesting talking to some of the folks from Google and these other social media, they are coming up with ways to detect fake videos and other things like that.
Right.
So we've got to just take that the next step. And, you know, the good part, we got some great talent out there. And I think, you know, Zuckerberg has had, you know, his first, you know, welcome to Congress meeting.
Welcome,
and
welcome
I think,
to the world.
Yeah, and then even worse to EU. So I think what they're going to do is go back and say, how do we fix this? How do we tighten it up? And I think we'll come up with some good ideas on it. But defending the nation is still out there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Do you think we should design fully automated military systems, or should humans always retain veto power?
I think humans should always retain veto power.
I do too.
And I think that, you know, it's interesting. I'm a tech guy. I'm not a historian. But if you go back to Clausewitz, what those that wish us harm, they want to impact your will to fight, our national will. And so they're going to use all devices that they can. It's not machine on machine. It's to impact our population, us as a country. And that will always be the target. So while machines can fight parts of the war, the impact is on our population, our people. And I think we can't lose sight of that. And it's interesting, I was in an armor unit, volunteered to be in an armor unit when everybody says there's no longer need for armor, and we won't need armor, and there was no need for this. And that was 1990, just going into the first Desert Storm. So I do think, that's what I think on that.
Well, but the problem now is we've got 50 nations that have developed some kind of robotic military operations, and you know, they're obviously all buying drones, but they're also interested in robotic soldiers and military. That many nations, including Russia and Iran and China and others, that are doing that. You know, we may say humans ought to be in charge, but once you develop that kind of robotic warfare, particularly in other countries, are they really going to care whether humans are in charge or whether those robots are accomplishing the military mission that they were assigned? I mean, that's a real problem in terms of you know, how do we gain controls over that? Because in many ways, it's similar to nuclear weapons. How do we, you know, we tried to grab some control over nuclear weapons.
We're going to have to do the same thing. I mean, we're going to end up back in the, you know, the restatement of a whole bunch of norms around the rules of engagement, and, you know, maybe we'll revitalize the role of the United Nations and what it's really supposed to be doing. I mean, we have to do something.
Yeah.
You can't be a free-for-all. That's not going to work, because, you know, what ends up happening, humans train the machine. And one of the things that is important in all of this is the ethics with which people decide to train. And so we have a point of view, our values, as Keith would say, that we will train into whatever robotic or, you know, AI systems that we have. They may not be shared by other people, right? They have different values with which they train. So I do think that we're going to fall back to, you know, having to have global norms and some controls around the rules of engagement in these things. And it's not a moment too soon to start that. I mean, if we were really thinking forward, we would say, okay, we should get ahead of this use of drones. We should use drones as an example, tip of the spear, of how and when is it appropriate to use drones, and do we use it under the same rules of engagement and that kind of thing, and who controls it, and do you have to go and, you know, the allies, people have to go and agree on it, that kind of thing. I think we better get ahead of it. I don't think we should just let it go organic.
Yeah, and I would just add to all that this is an area that machine, AI, faster computing is going to win.
Yeah.
And it's this decision loop.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons we have to lead the AI and computer race.
Keith, what is the NSA doing that it shouldn't be doing? And what isn't it doing that it should be doing?
Don't notice these television cameras anyway.
So I think it's a great question because it allows me to say, it's kind of interesting. First, NSA operates under our U.S. Constitution. So as the director, I had more oversight than any elementary school kid that had been in the principal's office a lot. And it's by Congress, the courts, and the administration. The NSA is not authorized to go out and collect information unless you have all those approvals. And then, ironically, it was targeted on terrorists, not U.S. people. So targeting, and the Zazi case is a great one where they targeted overseas communication, Al-Qaeda talking to somebody in the U.S. and found a bomb plot trying to blow up the New York City subway. That's what we want NSA to do. I think what the Snowden and all this has done is made NSA more skittish and put our country at risk in this area at a time when we can't afford that risk. And most importantly, I think many good people are leaving. Most of those people are paid a government salary. And I can now tell you, being on the outside, they get paid less than we do. And we want the best and the brightest to help keep this country safe. So I think that's the key thing. What should they be doing? Well, I would extend that to say, as we look at cyber, how do they help in the cyber and take the next step? And I think their engagement in many of these discussions is going to be key.
In your opinion, where does the U.S. stand in the competition to develop artificial intelligence? Are we devoting enough resources to this effort? Renee?
Are we devoting enough resources? No, I don't think we are. I think we're devoting a lot of resources on commercial implementation of machine learning and natural language, but a focused national-wide effort to make sure that we're the leaders in AI technology, I don't think has really come to fruition. So until we're doing that, because it's a building block technology to, as Keith said, it's a building block technology to the next superpower, or to maintain yourself as a superpower in combination with other technologies. I think until we have a nationalized, focused effort that includes academia and the government and private industry, I think we are not where we need to be. And that is what the Chinese have. And they've already said that they're going to make it, one of their top priorities. And they expect to be the leaders by a date that they've put out there. They said how much they're willing to spend on it. And I think that's that we should take that very seriously.
So, Keith, I agree. And I would add to that right now we lack a coherent national effort in this area.
That's right.
And if you think about it, we have a lot of great companies out there that are coming up with artificial intelligence rules around it, which I think are great. China is being led in a coherent effort by their government, and a lot of money, in Russia and in Europe. We should do the same if we agree that this is critical to our national future, which I believe it is. If we say that, I'm not saying take over from industry. I'm saying reinforce that, double down, make that a national initiative, and work with private industry to see how we can help be the leaders in this area. It's interesting because if you think about both AI and quantum computing, many believe that quantum computing will create a new era of computing like what happened in the mid-'80s. And think about how that helped our country and all these great companies that have sprung up since the mid-1980s, Microsoft, all on. And so with quantum, there could be another whole group of those. We need to lead in that area, and we're not. So I think we should put a national initiative. There should be a classified and unclassified portion, and we should drive this like we did the Manhattan Project, but not have it in Manhattan.
How can the United States defend against countries which have little distinction between industry and government and engage in industrial espionage? obviously, let's put China at the top of that list. And answer this question, but also, if you could, recently ZTE, which is a Chinese operation that was accused of espionage, and sanctions were placed against it. And the president then decided, I guess based on a call with President Xi, to try to rehabilitate ZTE and try to help Chinese workers. But Congress is obviously opposed to this because of the concern about espionage. What's the story on ZTE, and do the Chinese, I mean, you've talked about this transfer of wealth. How do the Chinese operate in this country with regards to ZTEs and Huawei and others?
Look at the time. Okay, so first, Huawei and ZTE, it's interesting, and many of you know this story, but for those of you who don't, Huawei was created by a third PLA person. Think of
Chinese
government Intel, and using stolen information from Cisco.
Right.
And then mass producing that at a price that Cisco couldn't compete at. Similar for ZTE. So think about, they have 1.3 billion people. You can mass produce routers and other capabilities at a price that we can't compete with. And it's stolen information from us. So two things. One, we've got to protect our intellectual property from them. And two, we've got to fix our defense. Our defense is, we have left this out in the open. And part of that defense isn't depending on companies to try to defend themselves against nation states, which in this case is what we're doing. We wouldn't say to Sony, protect yourself from an armed force from Russia if they come down the West Coast. Good luck. Build an army. We don't. We developed this government for the common defense. That includes cyber. So we've got to fix that. Now, where their government and their industry come together, I actually think ours not having them together is an advantage. It's an innovation advantage. And so the way we beat them, we out-innovate them, but we've got to protect that intellectual property that we're innovating. And we're not doing that today.
Do you see it in Silicon Valley, the Chinese making that kind of effort? All of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant, ever vigilant situation. I think it's a little bit more complicated. Chinese consumption of tech is more than half the market in most segments. And the number one import, we've been talking a lot about the other balance, their view on the imbalance is their number one import into China is semiconductors. So their view is, hey, wait a minute, and that is the core building block for all of these other industries. And so I think there's more to this. I think it's more complicated. I don't think we want to link them because of the innovation issue. I don't think that we want to have necessarily a economic industrial policy per se, but I do think we need to be more clever. I think we're going to have to actually ooch further towards some kind of industrial policy that says we're going to collaborate and we're going to be smarter than that. We're going to not only out-innovate, but we're going to protect. Most of the cyber, I already said this earlier in the evening, most of the cyber intrusions are oriented towards the theft of IP and know-how. Many of them are resident in the network for a long time. They are also coordinated with human intelligence, the placement of employees into the business, so that when the cyber is activated, whether it's a day, a week, or several years later in the network, the human employee with the data, that collaboration results in pretty good information and ability to use the data. And we see it everywhere. We see it in every single business. every single industry, and it's pretty much, one of the top things that you're protecting against. You're not protecting against necessarily, some people are protecting against credit cards and that kind of thing, depending on what business you're in. But if you are a major innovator, like a Cisco or an Oracle or an Intel or whomever, that's what you're protecting against, the theft of IP. So the ZTE thing, I noticed that the general didn't answer that part, but it's complicated. But what do they build? What is the thing they build? 5G chips. The thing we think is the next thing for the United States that we're going to be leaders in. We're going to deploy it the fastest of anyone in the world. So Huawei, that one genie's out of the bottle because 40% of the networks in the entire world, except for the United States, use Huawei. So everybody else's networks running Huawei in Europe and in, Asia and every place else. So now all of a sudden we have the ZTE thing. So I don't know the answer, but I don't understand it. Because all of a sudden, we're going to be the fastest country in the world to deploy 5G with what? Our own chips? So I don't understand it. I think it's very, very unique.
So that's a very nice way to say it. We're coming to the end here, and I just want to ask about this reliance that we have on the internet, from everything from power to banking and commerce, communications, defense. Can we agree that the internet is too big to fail, or should we be taking steps to try to decrease our level of dependence, or is it too late?
Too late.
Too late.
Too late.
Technology never goes backward. Remember that. That's a rule. That's like the thing, right? You can't put it back. So you got to make it better. You either have to have a network that's more secure, you have to have overlay networks that are more secure, you have to do things to it, but you can't take it back.
And you can, this is doable. The issue is,
technology exists.
I think we need a national vision that incorporates not only how we secure the network, but also on these key technologies, how we ensure our leadership. This is a competition, an economic competition for the future. Yeah. And
it's
it
like
impacts
the race
our
to
national.
space. It really is. It's that. I think I don't want to. It is not overstating it to say this is like the race to the moon.
Yeah.
And it is that level of coordination. When everybody was on board with that, it was a government initiative, but it took a lot of private industry to get to the moon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had two people who are probably one of the best group of experts on this whole issue this evening. On the American dream, obviously we need protection here, but I think the key, as we found out these last few lectures, the real key rests with all of you and the importance of protecting our democracy. If we protect our democracy, I think we can protect the American dream. Thank you very much. Thank you.